grace, does that mean we still have to follow the law? And it's like, well, you know, Jesus basically, the way he divvies up the commandments, if you will, is with two, right? Love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, soul, strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. So, in a sense, yeah, we still obey the Lord, and we obey, you know, the commandments that God has given us. But we are not under it in a sense of that, you know, Christ became, you know, our sin, and he took upon and he fulfilled that law that was there, that was meant to bring us to him, right? In Galatians, Paul talks about that, how, you know, the law was a schoolmaster, as a teacher, bring us to Christ. So yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on there. And Laverne, thank you so much for your call. We're going to go out to Mariana. Mariana, you are live on the air.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, how you doing?
Good. I just wanted to know why, you know, God decided to pick the Jewish over everybody. We're supposed to be all kind of united, and he's supposed to love all of us.
Okay, so why did God start the Jewish faith, if you will?
Right.
All right. So why did God choose the Jewish people, Pastor Robert, as a vessel, if you will, or as a group of people to reveal himself?
You know, he just chose them out of all the nations that were there. In fact, it says in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 7 through 9, the Lord did not set his affection on you and chose you because you were numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your forefathers that he brought you out of Egypt with a mighty hand. So God chose them because they were the least, right? He could have chosen the Babylonians. He could have chosen the Assyrians, the more fierce groups of people that would have become that. But the Jewish people were people that were more on the weak side, and God showed his power through them, and he just chose them. That's what the Bible says. There's no other reason but his divine choosing. What do you think, Rico?
No, yeah, I think you're right. And it's one of those things where, you know, this is one of those age-old questions, you know, why did God, you know, fill in the blank? And, you know, God often chooses the weakest, right, to show his strength. And I think that, you know, when he visits Abraham and, you know, gives him those promises, and Abraham responds in faith. But that's not to say, you know, Marianne, I know you had in that question at some point about why doesn't God love everyone? Well, you know, his plan was to reveal the gospel to all nations, just through the Jewish people. This was the means in which he did it. So it's not to say that it's exclusive to them, you know, at this point, but the gospel has been revealed and offered to all.
Right, exactly.
So does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, great. God bless you.
All right.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, it's a lot deeper than just, you know, why did God choose those people? But, you know, it's often, like we said, you know, God will use the least to show his strength. That's where
Amen.
That's where he gets all the glory from. We're gonna go out to John in Kentucky. John, you are live on BBT.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, cool. I have a good question I think a lot of people would want to know. So in Matthew 24, when Jesus is talking to his disciples and they say, give us the sign, you know, at the end of the world and you're coming, if you go down past when he's talking about the earthquakes and all that, he comes to verse 15, and he says, when you see the abomination of desolation talked about Daniel the prophet, you know, if you're on the rooftop, come down. Now, my church teaches a pre-trib rapture, and the church before that I went to was Baptist, and this one's Pentecostal. They both teach pre-trib, that we won't be here for the tribulation. But that verse says, we'll see the abomination of desolation, which happens 3.5 years into the tribulation. And then if you go further down on the 29th verse, he talks about immediately after the tribulation of those days, I'll gather my elect from the four winds of heaven. Doesn't talk about a white horse when we come back with him after the marriage supper of the Lamb. So those two verses right there, to me, it's post-trib. But I asked my pastor, and they can't give me an answer. They just say they're talking to the Jews, not meant for us, which I don't get that. So maybe you can explain it better, but I'd like to hear your thought on that. Is it pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib? I'm post-trib.
Yeah.
But I'd like to hear what you think.
Sure. Well, we're pre-trib, so we're going to give you probably what your pastor kind of said to you, but we'll go a little bit more specific on some of these. The fulfillment in 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 4, Paul elaborates on the future fulfillment of this Daniel chapter 11, verse 31, because that's where he's taking it from the abomination of desolation. This is what it says. It says, that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. The man of sin is revealed. The man of sin is speaking of the Antichrist, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God and that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple, showing himself that he is God. You got to go forward and think about this future judgment that's coming. Like you said, John, the first 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation will be peace, false peace, that is. The Antichrist will set his kingdom. He's going to have his own agenda, if you will. But then his true colors really come out in the middle of that Great Tribulation, where he stands in the temple. It's interesting, because right now the Jewish people, what they are missing is their sacrifice and temple. And so there is a time coming where all this will come together. And so the Temple Mount that's there, that's owned by the Muslims, somehow he's going to bring an agreement between the Jews and the Muslims, because that's where this is at. This is the epicenter. There's going to be a peace between both, where they're going to allow the Jews to continue their sacrifice, and somehow, the Islam's going to do their thing, but then the Antichrist will step in and says, I'm God, and then basically all hell breaks loose at that time. What do you think?
No, I agree, and yeah, we're pre-trib, and this is a passage, especially the entire chapter, Matthew 24. I would, we could talk about this for the entire show.
Right.
To kind of boil it down, I don't particularly think that what you have in this passage or in these passages kind of gets into what you're talking about there, John. I think, first of all, there's two things here. I think anytime you look at prophecy, a lot of times it's a double. It's a fulfillment where you see it actually happen twice. Sometimes usually it'll happen not too shortly after, and this event actually does happen not too shortly after. Where you have Epiphanes goes into the temple and he sacrifices wild boars or pigs, I think what it was, in the temple. Obviously then you have the desecration and all those things there, that abomination. However, in the context, we also don't see a lot of the things that are going to take place, which, is pre-tribulation. We would say that, these things are yet to come and yet to be fulfilled, and will be fulfilled during the tribulation period. Now, as far as, a little bit down, when you're looking at, let them flee, I don't think that has any bearing on whether or not it's pre-tribulation, or whether or not, I don't think that has a bearing on whether or not there's a rapture. I think that, in scripture, sometimes you just don't get all of the details, especially with eschatology. You're kind of putting the pieces together to see where, how these things could fall into place.
Yeah. And the other couple verses too, John, just to add to Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22, it says, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time. Jesus says, no ever shall be. And then he says, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. And so, again, the Great Tribulation, what is it for? Well, it's to deal with the new Jewish nation as a whole, but also for the rest of the people that rejected Christ before the rapture. They go into the Great Tribulation. People won't be saved. Jewish people are still saved to this day. Some could get saved, but the Great Tribulation will be where God's going to center on the nation once again, and then the rest that are there as well. So I know we can be on here for a long time, but I'm sure we explained it to you probably the way your pastor did.
Well, one other verse.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians chapter 50, when it says we should not all be die, but be changed in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. Mm-hmm. And then in Thessalonians it says at the trump, but it doesn't say last trump.
Yeah.
So why does it say last trump?
Yeah, those are, you can't confuse those two with the trumpets in the judgment in the book of Revelation. When you're looking at this, you're talking about an announcement that is being made in 1 Corinthians, speaking of, again, the rapture, right? In the twinkling of an eye, you shall be saved, or you'll be transformed, rather. The trumpets in the book of Revelation and the trumpets that we see there are much different, because those are all ones that are sounding off judgment. One trumpet is sounding off the rapture, right? It's an alert, it's a notification, if you will. So there's a lot of trumpets in Scripture, and you got to look at the context of each one. I mean, Rico, you've done that study?
Yeah,
before?
no, listen, and again, we could be on here all day about it because it is heavy. But I will say about 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4 is that you also have in that verse 16 that's not found is the element of Jesus descending from heaven, right? So that's not in 1 Corinthians 15. But then you also don't see Jesus descending until Revelation 19:11. So again, it's one of those things where, especially with eschatology, you're piecing together what you see, and we would land in the pre-tribulation for a lot of different reasons, not just 1 Thessalonians 4 or the twinkling of the eye passage, or even because Matthew 24. And sometimes there's some of us that are pre-tribulation that would agree to say, I don't see the rapture particularly in Matthew 24, and some would say that they do. This is something that a lot of it has to do with what your position is on how the early church fathers taught this, and like Pastor Robert said, I'm sure we kind of gave it to you in the sense of how your pastor did, but that's our position on this. And I think with eschatology in general, you kind of hold it open with an open hand. But we kind of stand firm on that, and there are other things that I would say that I would probably stand more firmly on, like whether or not there's a 1,000-year reign of Christ, which we would absolutely agree to, and so on and so on. So John, I hope we were helpful there for you in some way, shape, or form.
And the best thing to do is be ready no matter when he comes.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, we all can have different positions on eschatology, and definitely. But I think that we're all going to be in heaven. Yeah. And what I usually tell people, John, is, listen, I'll explain it to you on the way up.
Thanks for your call, John. You're listening to Bridge Bible Talk. We're a live call-in radio program where we answer any question you may have about the Bible or the Christian faith. So if you have a question, give us a call. 888-712-7434. 888-712-7434. And again, that number is 888-712-7434. I'm your host, Rico Basso, here in studio today with Pastor Robert Baltodano. We're going to go out to Ronald in Connecticut. Ronald, you are on Bridge Bible Talk.
Yeah, and how you doing, guys?
Good, how are you?
I just want to say I appreciate the show, and it's a blessing to listen to you guys. I'm going to have